In the category of continuing story, KFJM Radio in Grand Forks enters its coverage of the PCB burning project at the University of North Dakota Energy Research Center. I'm Dale Zocker, news reporter at KFJM.
I'm News Director Tammy Nelson-Roy. KFJM will present samples of its coverage of this issue, which aroused considerable interest in the Grand Forks community.
The story first broke in July 1986, but details about the project were very sketchy at first as UND officials kept silent about the issue. But public outcry began to increase in October that year. Our first story sample aired October 14th.
Some citizens yesterday expressed their concerns to city officials about a PCB burning project at the University of North Dakota Energy Research Center. As a result, the Council's Public Safety Committee is recommending that a public meeting be held on the issue. The Energy Center has received a $250,000 grant from Union Carbide to test incinerating PCBs as a method of destroying the suspected cancer-causing agent. Chairman of the Grand Forks chapter of the Sierra Club, Joe DeFlyer, says the experimental project could lead to the Energy Center doing commercial incineration of hazardous materials, and he says citizens aren't sure the project is safe.
But they are converting a 10 to 15-year-old piece of machinery designed for another use. Our point is that this sort of experimentation shouldn't be done in the middle of town. Even if the machinery works perfectly, there could still be emissions of dioxin, which is one of the most deadly substances known to man.
Energy Research Center Waste Management Division Director Dr. Charles Wentz says this is probably one of the safest projects ever done at the University of North Dakota, and he says, quote, incredible safeguards have been built in. He says the center does intend to go ahead with the project.
What we're trying to prove with our process is the concept of taking a hazardous waste and not only destroying it, but turning it into methane and a synthetic gas type material similar to what is being produced at the Great Plains coal gasification plant.
Wentz says an informational meeting is planned by the Energy Center in which federal EPA officials will be on hand. The Council Committee recommends that any city meeting be held in conjunction with the Energy Centers. 2 weeks later, formal opposition began to form. Here's an October 30th story.
A grassroots group of people concerned about a PCB burning proposal at the University of North Dakota Energy Research Center will be circulating a petition to prove opposition to the project. A group spokesperson, Kathy Williams, says the petitions will be presented to Energy Center officials at a public hearing, to City Council members, and to UND President Tom Clifford.
The petition reads, we, the undersigned, are opposed to the burning of PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, known cancer-causing agents, or any other toxic waste on the campus of the University of North Dakota. We feel this research is inappropriate for any residential area in or around Grand Forks or East Grand Forks.
Williams says the group has also organized into 6 committees to handle tasks such as publicity, research, legal issues, and fundraising. Union Carbide is sponsoring the $242,000 PCB burning project at the Energy Research Center. UND has stated it is looking for additional waste management projects. Williams says her group is giving Energy Center officials 30 questions to answer before a public hearing is held on the PCB project. A date for that hearing has not been set. As opposition grew, UND President Tom Clifford stepped in. Here's a November 20th story.
University of North Dakota President Tom Clifford has stopped test burns planned for the Energy Research Center's PCB project. Clifford halted the project after meeting with the group Citizens Concerned About Toxic Hazards. Group attorney David Thompson told reporters the ERC should have gotten 2 additional permits in order to burn surrogate materials in testing. He says instead the Energy Research Center was granted a modification to their current permit.
But the net effect of what happened here was that ERC, by trying to have a modification to its coal gasification permit, ERC effectively short-circuited the public participation and public input process with regard to this proposal. And until this group became involved, it was done very effectively.
Thompson accused the North Dakota Health Department of gross negligence for not looking more closely at what the ERC's plans were. ERC Director George Wiltsey says he thought the center had all the proper permits.
And the challenge that's been made, apparently, is that it's obtained through an invalid process or an incomplete process of some kind. So we want to do everything legally, and if there's any question about the validity of our permit, we want to straighten that out right away.
Thompson argued that the state health department did not follow its own regulations in not requiring the 2 additional permits. Clifford has halted the testing while university and state attorney general attorneys review whether proper procedures were followed. The ERC tests were leading up to the burning of 500 pounds of PCBs. The next day, the state health department stepped in to call a formal hearing. Here's a story that aired November 21st.
The North Dakota Health Department will hold a formal administrative hearing before PCBs can be burned at the UND Energy Research Center. State Environmental Enforcement Director Bill Delmore says the administrative hearing is more stringent than a public comment period requested by a citizens group concerned about the proposed burning.
It was always our intent to hold an information hearing regarding the activity before any PCB burn occurred. However, the university was involved, and the Environmental Protection Agency were involved, and there may have been consideration of hearings being held by them. In view of what's occurred, we will go ahead with what we initially proposed to do, but we are going to use a formal hearing process so that a record can be developed, which, if anyone's agreed by a decision, that record could be appealed to a district court.
Delmore says the hearing will deal with all the issues surrounding the burning, including its potential risks. Delmore says ERC and Environmental Protection Agency officials will probably be subpoenaed to testify at the hearing.
I think the real people who should have made the decision on this were the Environmental Protection Agency, because they have the clear expertise, not just in Denver, but in Washington and Research Triangle Park. The step we're taking with the formal hearing is we're taking on that decision-making process. We're going to bring them in, hear their testimony, and then the State Department of Health will make the decision.
Delmore says it'll take at least 60 days to set up the hearing, which will probably be held at UND after Christmas break. Health Department and ERC representatives met in closed-door sessions today. As Grand Forks waited for the Health Department to hold its hearing, KFJM aired 2 15-minute interviews with the ERC Director George Wiltsey and 2 15-minute interviews with Dexter Perkins, a member of the citizens group opposed to the project. On January 21st, the student government of the university sponsored an informational forum on the issue.
A verbal battle erupted at the end of that PCB informational forum. KFJM's Dale Zocker had the story.
The forum, sponsored by UND student government, was dominated by the testimony of Hugh Kaufman, an Environmental Protection Agency official who repeatedly attacked the safety and motives behind the proposed PCB burning at the UND Energy Research Center. Sitting in the audience was ERC Director George Wiltsey, who approached the microphone to defend the project and the ERC staff.
You look at our safety record and ask yourself, does that just happen? Is that happening because there's irresponsibility or greed? No, it's happening because people care about their safety and their neighbors and understand how to use these materials. And at the bottom line, I don't care what the permit says or doesn't say. We operate safely or we don't operate. Thank you.
George, since you...
When the applause died down, Kaufman challenged Wiltsey to see what would happen if he tried to reapply for a permit from the EPA.
I've heard that line by everybody. Excuse me, sir, what was that word you used? I have heard that line before.
One heckler from the audience called Kaufman a hired gun. A citizens group opposing the PCB project brought him in from Washington, D.C. to represent them at the forum. Wiltsey says the real truth about the safety of the burning will surface at an administrative hearing to be held next month. I'm Dale Zocker, KFJM News.
The North Dakota Health Department hearing began February 3rd. KFJM provided gavel-to-gavel coverage of the hearing, which stretched to 48 hours after 3 days. Here's a sampling.
Go into this thing with the least overall overall risk in the project. I have no further questions on this.
We'll take a 5-minute break. And so the first break in this third day of hearings regarding the proposed PCB research at the Energy Research Center at the University of North Dakota. You heard testimony from Al Wentz, the director of the project. Mr. Wentz has been recalled to clarify and to present some new information that he now has. Mr. Wentz was talking about the testing that was done in December on number 2 fuel oil, trying to get some measurements as to what temperature the fuel oil was being burned at. And my understanding that at the gasifier there is a optical thermometer, if you put it that way, that can read, without actually being in the fire, can read the temperature. And he was testifying that during the burn, some ash from the burning was blocking the thermometer, and that was causing some of the readings to be erroneous, if you'll put it that way, unrealistic. And he said that it was tested at 3,000 degrees and that they believe the testing did reach the 3,000 degree level. Again, going back again, the reason why this is all very pertinent is because that is the research being done here. There are 3 commercial incinerators of PCBs in the United States, and they burned PCBs at about a temperature in the 2,000 degree range. What this research would like to accomplish is to burn PCBs at about a 3,000 degree range, and they say that would be a more efficient way of disposing of this toxic chemical. And that is that's subject to a lot of scrutiny by both sides, though, because it is relatively an untested technology.
KFJM was the only station to provide live coverage of the hearings and the only media outlet to have a reporter on hand for the entire testimony. Here's a sampling of some of the stories from that hearing.
37 people testified during a 3-hour public comment period last night on the proposed burning of PCBs at the UND Energy Research Center. Most of the testimony was against allowing the project to continue. Here's a sampling of last night's testimony from the public.
We are opposed to the siting of this project on campus in a residential area.
I would certainly hope that our state health department recognizes the seriousness of its primary function and responsibility to protect the health and well-being of the citizens of North Dakota.
I believe the state of North Dakota is being targeted by Eastern corporations that don't have the interests of this state and its people at heart.
I don't want this area we call home turned into a toxic waste dump where hazardous chemicals are sent.
I don't want PCBs dumped and burned here.
Only 5 people testified in favor of the project. 300 attended the public participation hearing last night, including UND President Tom Clifford, who says he will make the final decision on whether the project will proceed.
The administrative hearing looking into the proposed burning of PCBs at the University of North Dakota Energy Research Center enters its third day of testimony this morning. Yesterday, Union Carbide produced a witness who said the burning would be 1,000 times less dangerous than smoking a cigarette. Dale Zucker had that story.
Dr. Michael Goff is from Environ, a scientific consulting firm from Washington, D.C. He says even if the 500 pounds of PCBs were burned without safeguards in the gasifier, there would only be a 1 in a billion chance of someone getting cancer from them.
I would have no concern about living at the point of maximum impact from that plume. And the reason for that is I've done a worst-case calculation, and the amounts to be done, the amounts to be used in the gasifier are very small, and so the risks are correspondingly small.
Goff said he used a complicated series of scientific assumptions to make the risk assessment. Union Carbide is paying for the PCB research at the UND Energy Research Center. David Thompson, the attorney for the citizens group that's opposed to the project, later said Goff's comments were not based on any scientific facts.
We saw no backup documents. We saw no actual statistics. We saw no methodology. We saw no calculations. As far as I'm concerned, it's very easy testimony to give. It's very difficult testimony to, in my view, have any serious credibility.
The Concerned Citizens Group will cross-examine Goff when the hearing resumes at 9 o'clock this morning. You can hear it live on KFJM 1370 AM. I'm Dale Zocker, KFJM News.
A citizens group opposed to the PCB burning project at the University of North Dakota Energy Research Center presented their case during the last day of a North Dakota Health Department administrative hearing. The citizens group called chemist David Schulk to the stand, who's writing a book on PCBs. Schulk said even burning PCBs at optimal conditions would still produce some toxic byproducts.
The use of heat to destroy PCBs is inappropriate. Especially in light of the fact that there are proven chemical methods. Sun, Ohio has a method that's been approved in all 10 EPA regions. Microbial and biological methods have been shown to work and are constantly being improved.
Union Carbide is paying the UND Energy Research Center $500,000 to burn 500 pounds of PCBs. The citizens group also presented the videotape comments of Dr. Paul Connett, a university professor from New York State.
It seems to me that Union Carbide and whoever else is interested in this test burn, if they want to do this test burn, should pay the extra bucks involved to build this plant or whatever away from people. To me, there is no justification for whatever risk that's involved in this process, that these people that live nearby your university should not be subjected to that risk at all.
Within 2 months, the North Dakota Health Department is expected to decide whether to allow that PCB project. As the hearing ended, 2 months lapsed as the Health Department made their decision. They announced their decision at a Grand Forks news conference that KFJM aired live. Here's the story from April 13th.
The North Dakota Health Department has denied a request to burn toxic PCBs at the UND Energy Research Center. In a 13-page decision, State Health Officer Robert Wentz says the PCB burning project is too risky and unproven to be done in a residential area.
I guess basically what we're saying is that the science is not developed far enough yet to make the kinds of decisions that were expected in this type of situation. In other words, we did not feel that we were in a situation where we could give any resident of this community a 100% guarantee that there could not be any adverse health effects of this project.
Union Carbide was reportedly paying UND $500,000 to burn 500 pounds of PCBs. The attorney for the citizens group that opposed the project, David Thompson, says he was confident his side would prevail.
I'd like to put a plug in for our state government. I think it's very clean state government. I think it has a lot of integrity, and I think that integrity in state government was manifested today. A big company like Union Carbide can't come in here with a lot of money and buy a permit.
The Energy Research Center's manager for the PCB project, Al Wentz, says he was deeply disappointed by the Health Department decision. He says UND officials will have to decide whether to appeal it to State District Court. 3 hours after the Health Department news conference, UND President Tom Clifford called a news conference that KFJM also aired live on April 13th. Here's the story.
University of North Dakota President Tom Clifford says he has to talk things over with the ERC and Union Carbide officials, but it's unlikely that UND will appeal the Health Department decision to District Court. Clifford says he has always questioned the safety of the project because it would have to have been done in the middle of Grand Forks.
It's unlikely that in any case we'll ever do that project on this site now, on the ERC site. If we go ahead, it wouldn't be here, it'd be another location.
Clifford says UND officials have considered moving the PCB burning project out of town before.
In fact, right after the hearings, we thought about it. We thought, well, maybe it's great. We heard all of the testimony, and we talked about, well, maybe it should be moved someplace else where that one factor wasn't that critical. But we never did make any approaches to any company or to any site, except to think about it as an alternative.
Clifford says Union Carbide this month had secured a $1 million insurance policy to cover potential accidents related to the proposed PCB burn. Union Carbide reportedly is paying UND $500,000 to burn the PCBs. Clifford says he does not know how much is involved and whether UND must give it back.
About a month later, the story finally ended when UND announced that it would not appeal the health department decision. That concludes KFJM's entry in the continuing story category.